What if the one choice that could change your life meant giving up everything you had ever worked for? Margot Sinclair had spent years building an empire. Power, wealth, and control were all she had ever known. But when a single act of kindness leads her to a struggling single dad and his bright-eyed daughter, she's forced to question everything. How do you walk away from a world that has defined you? And more importantly, what if you don't want to? This is a story about love, redemption, and the kind of choices that define us. Stay with me until the end. You won't want to miss what happens next. If you love gripping, heartfelt stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Now let's begin. A struggling single dad had no idea who owned the dog until she showed up at his door. Rain pounded against the windshield of Daniel Carter's old pickup truck as he navigated the slick, darkened roads on his way home. The wipers struggled against the downpour, barely keeping up with the relentless sheets of water that blurred his vision. It had been another exhausting day. 10 hours of hauling lumber at the construction site, followed by an evening shift delivering groceries to make ends meet. His hands ached, his back throbbed, and his stomach growled from skipping dinner. But none of that mattered. The only thing on his mind was getting home to his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. The gaslight flickered on, a reminder of yet another expense he wasn't sure how to cover. He exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Just a few more miles," he muttered to himself. He turned onto the familiar cracked pavement of his neighborhood, where dim porch lights flickered in defiance of the storm. Then, out of nowhere, a flash of movement on the side of the road caught his eye. Daniel instinctively hit the brakes, his heart lurching as he squinted through the rain-streaked glass. A small, shivering shape huddled near the curb, its golden fur soaked and matted against its frail frame. A dog, alone, helpless. He hesitated. Bringing in a stray dog was the last thing he needed. He barely had enough food for himself and Sophie, and their tiny rental house was already a financial burden. Logic told him to drive away, to let animal control handle it. But then he imagined Sophie's big brown eyes, the way they always lit up when she saw a dog in the park. He imagined her voice full of innocence and hope. "Daddy, every lost puppy needs a home." With a sigh, Daniel pulled over and reached for the old hoodie in the passenger seat. Stepping out, he was instantly drenched. The cold rain seeped through his clothes, but he barely noticed. The dog flinched as he approached, curling in on itself. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, crouching down. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The dog lifted its head, revealing soft, pleading eyes, deep brown and full of silent fear. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that look. It was the same look Sophie had the night her mother left. His resolve cracked. "All right," he muttered, wrapping the hoodie around the trembling animal. "Let's get you out of this mess." The dog barely resisted as he lifted it into his arms, its damp body pressing against his chest. He hurried back to the truck, cranked up the heat, and laid the shivering creature on the worn passenger seat. The dog curled up immediately, exhausted but trusting. Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his damp hair. He was going to regret this. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Their tiny home, one bedroom, peeling paint, and a leaky roof, wasn't much, but it was safe. Sophie's nightlight glowed softly from her window, a beacon of warmth in the storm. He carried the dog inside, careful not to wake his daughter. But the second he stepped through the door, Sophie stirred. "Daddy?" Her sleepy voice drifted from her room, followed by the soft patter of bare feet on the old wooden floor. Daniel turned, already bracing for the excitement. Sure enough, the moment she saw the dog, her eyes widened with pure joy. "A puppy!" she gasped, running over. "Is it ours?" Daniel chuckled, kneeling down. "Easy, kiddo. He's lost. I just found him in the rain." Sophie gently touched the damp fur, her little fingers careful and full of wonder. The dog, surprisingly, wagged its tail just once. "That means he likes me," she whispered, as if it were a secret only they shared. Daniel sighed. He knew that look on her face too. Hope. The kind that made it impossible to say no. "We'll keep him for now," he relented, ruffling her messy curls. "But we have to find his owner, okay?" Sophie beamed. "Okay." As he dried off the dog with an old towel, he murmured, "What should we call him until then?" Sophie scrunched up her nose in thought. "Lucky." Daniel raised a brow. "Lucky." "Yeah." She nodded confidently. "Because he's lucky you found him." Daniel couldn't argue with that. But he had no idea just how much this dog would change their lives. As Sophie drifted back to sleep, Lucky curled up beside the couch where Daniel sat, deep in thought. The storm outside had quieted, but inside him a different storm raged. One of uncertainty, of wondering if he had just made his life more complicated, or if this tiny act of kindness was about to set something far greater into motion. At that moment, he wasn't sure if Lucky was the lucky one. Maybe, just maybe, they all were. Morning light streamed through the thin curtains of Daniel Carter's modest home, casting a soft glow over the worn-out furniture. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp freshness in the air. But inside, Daniel's mind was far from peaceful. Lucky lay curled up at the foot of the couch, his golden fur now clean and dry. The night before, after Sophie had fallen back asleep, Daniel had taken extra care to make the dog comfortable. He had fed him bits of leftover chicken from dinner, one of the few things in their fridge, and made sure he had a warm place to sleep. But now reality was sinking in. This wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was another responsibility he wasn't sure he could afford. A loud knock at the door shattered his thoughts. Daniel frowned, glancing at the clock. 7:30 a.m. No one ever came by this early. He walked to the door and opened it, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe someone from the leasing office. Instead, he found a woman standing there. She didn't belong here. That much was immediately clear. Dressed in a sleek black trench coat over a perfectly tailored blouse, her auburn hair was styled in an elegant twist. A pair of sharp, assessing eyes regarded him, their blue-grey depths scrutinizing every inch of him, his house, his situation. She looked out of place, like a queen who had somehow wandered into the wrong part of town. Then he saw the leather leash in her hand. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," she said, her voice smooth, practiced, and laced with just a hint of annoyance. Daniel blinked. His tired mind took a moment to catch up before realization dawned on him. The dog. His gaze dropped to Lucky, who had come to stand beside him, tail wagging slightly. The dog let out a small whimper, shifting nervously. Daniel looked back up at the woman. "You're his owner?" She gave a small nod, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, I've been searching for him for days." Daniel crossed his arms, instinctively guarded. "Well, he was soaking wet and alone in the middle of a storm last night. I didn't see any tags, and he looked terrified. You sure he belongs?" "To you?" The woman's jaw tensed slightly. "Yes, I'm sure." Silence stretched between them. Lucky let out another soft whimper, inching closer to Daniel's leg, pressing against him as if seeking comfort. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "He doesn't seem too eager to go with you." The woman exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. "Look, I appreciate you taking care of him, but I didn't come here to debate. His name is Bailey, and I would like him back." Sophie's small voice cut through the tension. "Bailey?" Daniel turned to find his daughter standing in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her gaze flickered between Lucky, Bailey, and the woman at the door. But we named him Lucky." The woman's expression softened slightly as she looked at Sophie, but her determination remained. "His name is Bailey, and he's my dog." Sophie's lower lip trembled. But he likes us. Daniel let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but what could he say? The dog did belong to her. Keeping him would be wrong. Still, something about this didn't sit right. He crouched down, beside Sophie. "Sweetheart, I know you love him already, but he has a home. We have to do the right thing." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. She swallowed hard, trying to be strong, but her small fingers clenched into fists at her sides. "But Daddy, what if his home isn't good?" Daniel looked up at the woman again, studying her. She was rich, clearly well off, but there was something distant about her. The way she stood, the way she spoke, detached, as if this was just another business transaction. Something wasn't adding up. He was alone in the rain, Daniel said, choosing his words carefully. No collar, no ID. "You sure you didn't just misplace him?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I was. Away on business. He must have gotten out while I was gone." Daniel considered her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but if he's really yours, then I'd like to see how he reacts to you." Surprise flickered across her face. "Excuse me." "You heard me." He gestured toward the dog. "If Bailey really belongs to you, let's see if he actually wants to go back." The woman hesitated, then crouched down and patted her thigh. "Bailey, come." The dog didn't move. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Lucky Bailey simply stayed where he was, pressed against Daniel's leg, his body tense. His tail did not wag. The woman frowned. "Bailey, come." Still, nothing. Daniel stood up. "Huh." The woman's frustration was now impossible to miss. "He's just being stubborn. He knows me." "Maybe," Daniel said, his voice measured, "or maybe he doesn't want to go." Sophie reached down and stroked Lucky's fur. "Maybe he ran away because he didn't like where he was." The woman's gaze snapped to Sophie, and for the first time something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, something closer. To doubt. Daniel watched her carefully. "Why don't we do this?" he offered. "Give it a day, let him warm back up to you. If he's truly yours, he'll want to go home with you." The woman looked as if she wanted to argue, but then, to his surprise, she let out a breath and nodded. "Fine. One day." She turned on her heel, striding toward her car. Before getting in, she paused. "My name is Margot Sinclair. I'll be back tomorrow." With that, she drove away, leaving Daniel standing in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear down the street. One day. That was all he had. But somehow, he had the feeling this wasn't just about a dog anymore. Daniel couldn't shake the tension from his body as he watched Margot Sinclair's car disappear down the street. The morning's encounter had left him uneasy, not just because of her sharp demeanor, but because of Lucky's, or Bailey's, reaction. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't wagged his tail, hadn't acknowledged her the way a pet should its rightful owner. That was what made Daniel wary. Yet, there was something in Margot's expression before she left, a flicker of doubt. He had seen it, and that meant something. He closed the door and turned to Sophie, who still had one hand resting gently on Lucky's back. "Are we really going to let her take him, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Daniel sighed. "Sweetheart, if he belongs to her, it's only fair." Sophie's lip quivered, but she nodded. "But what if he's not happy with her?" That question gnawed at him as he went about his morning routine, making Sophie breakfast, feeding Lucky, and struggling to ignore the stack of overdue bills sitting on the kitchen counter. He knew Sophie didn't fully understand the weight of their situation, but he did. He knew how close they were to losing everything. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Daniel exchanged a glance with Lucky, who immediately perked up but didn't move toward the door. That, too, was telling. With a sigh, he opened it. Margot stood on his porch again, this time dressed in a sleek navy blazer and tailored slacks. Her presence felt even more out of place against the backdrop of his modest home. There was no trench coat shielding her this time, no barrier. Between her and the world she had clearly never belonged to. Yet something about her posture suggested she was trying, perhaps for the first time, to step outside her comfort zone. "I'd like to talk," she said simply. Daniel crossed his arms. "About what?" Margot hesitated before exhaling. "About Lucky, or Bailey, whatever you're calling him." He stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. She did, her gaze sweeping over the small living room with its second-hand furniture and Sophie's crayon drawings tacked to the fridge. Daniel saw the moment she took it all in, his reality. But she didn't comment. Instead, she got straight to the point. "I want to hire you." Daniel blinked. "Come again?" She folded her hands. "Bailey, Lucky, he's become attached to you. I don't know why, but he is. And I don't want to traumatize him by forcing him away. So, I propose." "A deal," Daniel frowned. "What kind of deal?" "You help transition him back into my home. A few weeks, maybe a month. I'll pay you generously for your time." A muscle in Daniel's jaw tightened. He wasn't some charity case she could just throw money at. "So what, I become your dog sitter?" Margot lifted her chin. "You become someone who helps him adjust." Silence stretched between them. Sophie, who had been listening quietly, suddenly perked up. "You mean he can stay?" Margot hesitated, then nodded. "For now." Daniel saw the way Sophie's eyes lit up, and for a second his resolve wavered. But then he turned back to Margot. "You can't just buy your way out of this. If he's really yours, why did he run away?" Margot's expression flickered, just for a second, then she smoothed it over. "I was away on business. He must have gotten out." Daniel studied her. There was something missing from her answer, something she wasn't saying. But before he could press further, she spoke again. "I'll pay you $10,000. His breath hitched. 10 grand. That was more than he had made in the last 3 months combined. He could pay rent, buy groceries, keep Sophie from worrying about the lights going out. Margot saw the hesitation in his eyes and pressed forward. "You take care of him, let me visit, and we gradually transition him back." It was tempting, too tempting. He hated himself for considering it. He hated that money had to be the deciding factor, but Sophie needed stability. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Margot extended a hand. When he hesitated, she smirked slightly. "I don't bite, Carter." Daniel rolled his eyes, but shook her hand. And just like that, his life got a whole lot more complicated. Daniel sat on the worn-out couch, staring at the freshly signed contract on the coffee table. The ink was still drying, yet the weight of what he had agreed to had already settled heavily on his chest. $10,000. It was an amount he couldn't afford to refuse, but the moment he shook Margot Sinclair's hand, he knew his life had just taken a turn he wasn't prepared for. Sophie, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, knelt beside Lucky, gently scratching behind his ears. "This means we get to keep him, right, Daddy?" Daniel forced a smile, running a hand through his hair. "For now, sweetheart. Just for a little while." A knock at the door made him tense. He had expected Margot to at least wait a day before coming back, but when he opened the door, she was there, standing tall in a pristine white blouse and tailored black pants. She looked out of place against the backdrop of his modest home, yet for the first time there was something different about her stance, an unspoken hesitation. "I'd like to start today," she said, her tone measured but firm. Daniel stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Lucky immediately tensed, but didn't bolt. His tail remained still, ears perked, eyes wary. The reaction didn't go unnoticed. Margot set down a designer handbag, kneeling on the floor at a deliberate, careful pace. "Hey, Bailey," she murmured. "It's me. Do you remember?" Lucky lowered his head slightly, but didn't move closer. Sophie, watching the exchange, leaned against Daniel's leg and whispered, "He's scared." Margot's expression faltered just for a second before she straightened. "This will take time," she admitted, more to herself than anyone else. Daniel crossed his arms. "Dogs don't just run away for no reason. You never told me why he left." Margot exhaled, standing. "I was out of town on business. My house staff was supposed to take care of him. I came home and he was gone. That's all I know." "That's not all," Daniel said flatly. "Because he's not running to you now?" A flicker of something unreadable crossed Margot's face. Frustration? Guilt? It was gone before he could place it. Instead of answering, she turned her attention back to Lucky. "If I had known he was unhappy, I would have done something about it." Daniel scoffed. "Maybe you should have spent more time with him in the first place." Margot's head snapped toward him, her eyes sharp. "You don't know anything about my life." "I know enough." Daniel held her gaze. "You're rich, powerful, and used to getting what you want. But this isn't about money. It's about trust. And right now you don't have his." Margot's lips parted, as if she was about to snap back, but then, as if catching herself, she sighed. "You're right." That took Daniel by surprise. He wasn't used to people like her admitting fault. Margot ran a hand over her temple, her composed exterior showing its first signs of wear. "I've been so focused on work that I never noticed if something was wrong. I just assumed." She stopped herself and shook her head. "I don't want to assume anymore. That's why I'm here." For the first time, Daniel saw something beyond the cold, business-like demeanor. A woman who was genuinely trying, even if she wasn't sure how. Sophie suddenly perked up. "Maybe if you do something nice for him, he'll start to trust you again." Margot turned toward her, the edges of her lips softening. "Like what?" Sophie beamed. "He loves belly rubs and treats, and Daddy says the way to a dog's heart is through his stomach." Daniel coughed, giving Sophie a side-eye. "I said that about people." Margot hesitated, then slowly reached into her handbag, pulling out a bag of high-end dog treats. "Well, I did come prepared." She held out a treat, but Lucky didn't move. Daniel and Sophie watched, waiting, but the dog only sniffed the air, hesitant. Then slowly, carefully, Lucky inched forward, taking the treat from Margot's fingers. A breath Daniel didn't realize he had been holding slipped from his chest. Margot's expression remained neutral, but the slight relief in her posture was undeniable. Sophie clapped her hands. "See, it's working." Margot nodded, still watching Lucky as he chewed. "It's a start." Daniel wasn't sure if she was talking about the dog or herself. The air between Daniel and Margot had settled into something precarious, not quite trust, not quite hostility. It had been a few days since their arrangement had begun, and while Margot had kept her word about visiting Lucky daily, progress remained slow. Lucky tolerated her presence, but that was the best Daniel could say. He still hesitated before approaching her, still favored staying close to Sophie and Daniel rather than going to the woman who claimed to be his owner. Margot, to her credit, never forced it. She let Lucky keep his distance, and for that, Daniel felt a begrudging respect. Still, something about her didn't sit right with him. She was too careful, too controlled. He had seen people try to mask their emotions before. He had been one of them. But the way Margot did it, it was almost too practiced, like she had spent years perfecting the art of shutting the world out. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Daniel stepped onto the porch to find Margot standing by her car, staring off into the night. "You planning on leaving, or are you just admiring my fine parking lot?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Margot turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I used to live in a neighborhood like this," Daniel raised. "Brow, that was unexpected. Really? Can't picture you outside of some high-rise penthouse." A small, almost wistful smile touched her lips. "That came later." She paused, then exhaled. I didn't grow up with money, Daniel. My parents, they worked constantly just to keep food on the table. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked construction. That made Daniel pause. He had assumed she had always been privileged, that she had no idea what it meant to struggle. But the way she said it, the way her voice turned slightly distant, told him that this was a past she didn't share often. "What changed?" he asked, his voice softer than before. Margot glanced down, her fingers tightening on the edge of the car door. "My father died when I was 16, a workplace accident, no insurance, no compensation, just gone." She swallowed, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked vulnerable. "My mother spiraled. She did her best, but she wasn't the same after that. I realized if I didn't get out, I'd end up stuck in the same cycle. So I fought. I took out loans, worked 3 jobs, and clawed my way into college, then into law school, then into business." Daniel was silent for a moment. He had never imagined Margot Sinclair had ever known hardship. She had carried herself with such effortless confidence, the kind only money and power seemed to grant, and yet here she was, someone who had once stood exactly where he was now. "That's why you work so much," he murmured. Margot nodded. "When you spend your whole life fighting to survive, it's hard to stop, even when you don't have to anymore." Daniel exhaled, looking out at the dark street. "I get that." And he did, more than she probably realized. They stood there, and for a while, neither speaking. The tension between them had shifted, not gone, but different, less adversarial, more understanding. Margot finally broke the silence. "What about you?" she asked. "I can tell you weren't always here." Daniel chuckled dryly. "You sure about that?" "Yes." She turned to him fully now, studying him with those sharp blue-grey eyes. "You carry yourself like someone who's had more, who lost it." It was eerily accurate. Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. "I was married once. We had a good life, or at least I thought we did. My wife, Sophie's mother, she wanted more than what I could give her, so she left." Margot didn't react, didn't look surprised. Instead, she simply asked, "And you? What did you want?" Daniel hesitated, then glanced back inside. The house, where Sophie was fast asleep. Just this, a simple life, one where my kid knows she's safe, one where I'm enough. Margot held his gaze for a long time, something flickering in her expression. Understanding, recognition, maybe even regret. Finally, she nodded. "Then I guess we're not so different after all." Daniel wasn't sure what to say to that, so he didn't say anything at all. Instead, they stood there a little longer, 2 people from opposite worlds who had more in common than either had expected. And for the first time since she had walked into his life, Margot Sinclair didn't feel quite like a stranger anymore. For the first time since their uneasy arrangement had begun, Daniel found himself watching Margot rather than simply tolerating her presence. The layers she had slowly started to reveal intrigued him. She wasn't just the icy, business-driven woman he had assumed. Beneath the wealth and polished exterior was someone who had fought, just like he had, to survive. But understanding her didn't mean trusting her. Not yet. It had been nearly a week since their agreement started. Margot visited daily, always, impeccably dressed, always with some new high-end treat or toy for Lucky. She was trying, that much was clear. But Lucky was still hesitant, accepting her presence but not yet embracing it. The dog's caution mirrored Daniel's own. Margot was making an effort, but was it genuine, or was she simply fulfilling an obligation? That morning, Daniel was fixing a loose step on his porch when Margot's sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Lucky lifted his head from where he lay at Daniel's feet but didn't move. The dog was still wary, though Daniel could see the faintest hint of recognition in the way Lucky's ears perked slightly when Margot stepped out of the car. You. No, you don't have to keep showing up with gifts, Daniel remarked, standing as she approached. Margot raised a brow. It's not bribery. It's an effort. Effort doesn't always need a price tag. She sighed, glancing at Lucky before returning her gaze to Daniel. You think I don't know that? Before he could respond, a new voice cut through. The tension. Well, isn't this interesting? Both Daniel and Margot turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed man stepping out of a luxury car parked just a few houses down. His sharp features, neatly styled hair, and the casual arrogance in his posture made it clear he was someone used to getting what he wanted. Margot's posture stiffened immediately. Nathan. Daniel felt an instant dislike settle in his gut. Nathan sauntered toward them, his expensive shoes barely making a sound against the pavement. His gaze flickered to Daniel, sizing him up before settling on Margot with a smirk. I was wondering where you'd been sneaking off to lately. Margot crossed her arms. What are you doing here? Nathan feigned innocence. What, no warm welcome? And here I thought we had history. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. There was something about Nathan, too smooth, too rehearsed, too entitled, that set him on edge. He didn't know the full story between him and Margot, but he didn't need to. He had seen men like Nathan before, the kind who thought money and charm made them untouchable. Margot exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. I don't have time for whatever game you're playing, Nathan chuckled. Oh, but I think you do. See, I heard an interesting rumor. You've been spending quite a bit of time in this part of town with a single father, no less. People are starting to talk. Daniel took a step forward, his voice even but firm. If you have something to say, just say it. Nathan turned his full attention to him, his smirk never wavering. Ah, so you're the one she's been slumming it with. Margot's expression darkened. Nathan, Daniel didn't flinch. If by slumming it, you mean taking in care of my daughter, working 2 jobs, and actually earning what I have, then yeah, that's me. Nathan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. I have to say, Margot, I never pictured you settling for something so simple. Margot's hands curled into fists. That's enough. But Nathan wasn't done. He turned back to Daniel, his smirk sharpening. I'm just curious. What exactly do you think is happening here? Do you honestly believe she's going to trade in her penthouse and designer wardrobe for this? He gestured vaguely to the small, worn-down house behind Daniel, because I can promise you that's not who Margot Sinclair is. Daniel held his ground, refusing to take the bait. You done? Nathan tilted his head as if considering. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek checkbook. Flipping it open, he scribbled something down, tore the check free, and held it out to Daniel. Here, consider this a favor. Walk away. Daniel didn't even glance at the amount. He took the check, ripped it in half without breaking eye contact, and let the pieces fall to the ground. Not for sale. For the first time, Nathan's smirk wavered. Margot took a step forward, her voice steely. Nathan, leave now. Nathan's jaw clenched, but after a long pause, he let out a slow, amused exhale. Suit yourself. He turned on his heel, sauntering back to his car. Before getting in, he threw a final glance over his shoulder. Just don't say I didn't warn you. The car's engine roared to life, and in moments, he was gone. Daniel let out a breath, looking at Margot. So, that was fun. Margot let out a humorless laugh. That's one word for it. She ran a hand over her temple, suddenly looking exhausted. Nathan's my ex-fiancé, and a mistake I'd rather not repeat. Daniel nodded, letting that settle. He had his own thoughts about Nathan, none of them good. But for now, the only thing he knew for sure was that whatever was happening between him and Margot, it had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Daniel sat on the porch, staring at the torn pieces of Nathan's check still fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. The encounter had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Nathan wasn't just some arrogant businessman. He was a calculated threat. The way he had spoken, the way he had smirked, told Daniel everything he needed to know. Nathan wasn't done. Margot stood a few feet away, arms crossed, staring out at the dimly lit street. She'd been silent since Nathan left, the tension in her body evident. Finally, she exhaled and turned toward him. "I didn't expect him to show up here," Daniel scoffed. "Well, he sure had a lot to say, and a check to offer." Margot's expression darkened. "Nathan doesn't like losing, and more than that, he doesn't like when I make decisions that he can't control." Daniel studied her. "Is that what this is? You defying him?" She met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "No, this is me choosing what I want." Silence hung between them. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to trust, that she wasn't just here to prove a point to her past, but something about this entire situation felt fragile, like one wrong step would send it all crashing down. Lucky, sensing the tension, whined softly and nudged against Daniel's leg. He absent-mindedly scratched behind the dog's ears. Margot hesitated before crouching down, extending her hand toward Lucky. "You trust him, don't you?" she murmured, watching as the dog inched forward slightly. He sniffed her fingertips, but didn't move closer. Still hesitant, still unsure. Just like Daniel, she pulled back with a small, almost wistful smile. "Maybe one day." Daniel ran a hand over his face, exhaling. "Look, Margot, I don't know what this is, or where it's going, but if Nathan is willing to throw around money just to get rid of me, what does that mean for you?" She stood slowly, dusting off her slacks. "It means he's scared," Daniel chuckled dryly. "Of what?" Margot tilted her head. "That maybe, just maybe, I've finally stopped letting him dictate my life." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. He had spent so much time assuming she was just another version of the world Nathan came from, cold, untouchable. But here she was, choosing to stand her ground, choosing to stay. Before he could say anything else, Sophie's voice rang from inside the house. "Daddy, dinner's ready." Daniel turned toward the door, hesitating. When he glanced back at Margot, she was already taking a step away. "You should go," she said softly. "She needs you." There was something final in her tone, a subtle shift that made Daniel's chest tighten. "And you?" he asked. Margot smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to figure out what I'm doing next." He wanted to stop her, to tell her to stay, to tell her that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for here. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. "All right." She lingered for a second longer before turning toward her car. As she opened the door, Lucky let out a small whine. Margot paused, glancing at the dog one last time. Then, without another word, she got in and drove away. Daniel stood there watching the taillights fade into the distance. A part of him knew this wasn't the end. But right now, it sure felt like goodbye. The silence in Daniel's house felt heavier after Margot left. The sound of her car fading into the night lingered longer than it should have, settling in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. Lucky lay curled at his feet, his tail flicking, slightly in restless agitation, as if he too sensed that something had shifted. Sophie's voice cut through the quiet. "Is Miss Margot coming back tomorrow?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know, sweetheart." Sophie frowned, twirling her fork in her plate of spaghetti, but she said she was trying. Daniel sat down across from her, rubbing a hand over his face. "Sometimes, even when people try, things don't go the way they want." Sophie tilted her head, eyes full of innocent wisdom. "Then they should try harder." He smiled despite himself, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "You're smarter than me, kid." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Daniel tossed and turned. The memory of Margot's face before she left burned into his thoughts. There had been something unspoken in her eyes, a kind of quiet resignation that he hated, but whatever was happening between them, He didn't have time to dwell on it. The next morning, his phone buzzed incessantly on the counter. He groaned, rolling over and grabbed it. The caller ID flashed a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Daniel Carter?" a clipped professional voice asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Melissa Grant from Sinclair Enterprises. We need to speak immediately." His brows furrowed. "Sinclair Enterprises?" "Yes," the woman said sharply. "I assume you're aware of the article that was published this morning?" Daniel sat up fully now, his pulse ticking up a notch. "Article?" A pause, then a sigh. "You should check for yourself. I'll hold." Heart pounding, he grabbed his laptop, fingers moving faster than his brain. The moment the homepage loaded, he saw it. Sinclair Heirs' secret life, powerful CEO tangled in small-town love affair. Daniel felt his stomach drop. His name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't need to be. The article had pictures, photos of Margot leaving his house, of them standing too close together on his porch, of Lucky sitting between them like a shared secret. The implications were clear. Margot, Sinclair, billionaire CEO, had fallen for a struggling single dad. "This is some kind of joke," he muttered, scrolling further. But it wasn't. The article painted an entire narrative, that Margot had been secretly seeing him, that she was hiding a double life, and that their connection was unprofessional at best, scandalous at worst. And then he saw Nathan's name. Nathan. Pierce, a close source to Sinclair Enterprises, commented on the situation, stating that Margot has been making reckless choices lately. "I hope she comes to her senses before it's too late." Daniel gritted his teeth. Of course. This wasn't just gossip. This was Nathan controlling the story, planting the seeds of doubt in Margot's world. Melissa's voice brought him back. "Mr. Carter, are you still there?" "Yeah." He exhaled, pressing his fingers to his temple. "What does this have to do with me?" Melissa hesitated. "Miss Sinclair is in a board meeting right now. There are concerns about how this situation affects the company. We need you to—" "To what?" Daniel snapped. "Walk away?" Another pause. Then, carefully, "It would be in everyone's best interest if this situation didn't escalate." His hands clenched into fists. "You mean if I disappeared?" Melissa didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. Daniel let out a sharp breath, staring at the screen again. Margot had fought so hard to escape being controlled, and now here it was, her past and present colliding in the ugliest way possible. "I need to talk to her," he said. "That won't be possible right now." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Then I'll find a way." Meanwhile, across town, Margot sat in a high-rise conference room, her hands gripping the table. Her board members spoke in sharp, clipped tones around her, dissecting the scandal, throwing around words like reputation risk and damage control. But all she could focus on was the man sitting across from her. Nathan. Smug, composed, leaning back in his chair, as if he had orchestrated every piece of this perfectly. Margot's blood boiled. He had. "Margot," one of the senior board members was saying, "we need to issue a statement. Publicly distance yourself from Carter before this gets any worse." Her stomach twisted. She knew this moment would come, knew how ruthless this world was. But knowing didn't make it easier. She thought of Daniel, of Sophie, of the simple life that had made her feel more human in just a few weeks than she had in years. And then she thought of the company she had built, the empire she had fought tooth and nail for. If she didn't choose carefully, she could lose it all. Nathan's voice cut through the chaos. "Margot, don't be foolish. You know what you need to do." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw exactly what. He wanted power, control, her submission. Her hands curled into fists. Not this time. She straightened her spine, her voice steady as she said, "I need to think." Nathan smirked. "Of course, but don't take too long. You don't want to regret this." She met his gaze, steel in her own. "No, I don't." Margot stood, ignoring the calls of the board behind her. There was only one place she needed to be, with the man who had never asked her to be anything but herself, and she wasn't going to let him go that easily. The world outside felt quieter than usual, but inside Daniel's home, a storm raged. The article had done its damage. Margot was being crucified by the press, her company demanding an immediate response, and Daniel, he was left holding the shattered pieces of something that had barely begun. He had spent the past 24 hours trying to reach her. Every call went to voicemail, every text left unread. Sophie sat on the couch, hugging Lucky, her wide eyes flickering between Daniel and the unopened newspaper on the table. She wasn't old enough to understand everything, but she knew enough to feel the tension suffocating the house. "Daddy," she whispered, "is Miss Margot in trouble?" Daniel exhaled and sat beside her. "Yeah, sweetheart, she is." Sophie frowned, gripping Lucky's fur a little tighter. "Why don't we help her?" Daniel hesitated. How could he explain the politics, the media, the power plays? How could he explain that Margot might not even want his help? Before he could answer, Sophie slipped off the couch, determination lighting up her little face. "I'm gonna help." Her. Daniel blinked. Sophie, but she was already marching toward the kitchen, pulling out crayons, markers, and a sheet of paper from her backpack. He watched in silence as she poured every ounce of her heart into whatever she was creating. She pressed the crayons so hard against the page that their tips nearly broke, her small fingers working furiously. When she was done, she held up her creation. "I need to give this to her." Daniel swallowed as he took in the drawing. Margot, him, Sophie, Lucky, all standing together, hand in hand, and above them in bold, uneven letters the words, "Family stays together." His throat tightened. "Sophie." She held it to her chest like a lifeline. She needs to know she's not alone. Daniel had been fighting this battle alone, trying to figure out what to do, but leave it to Sophie to cut through all the noise with a simple, undeniable truth. Margot wasn't alone, not if she didn't want to be. Margot's penthouse was locked, down tighter than a fortress. Security posted at every entrance. The fallout from the scandal was worse than she had anticipated. She had expected criticism, expected the board to be unhappy, but she hadn't expected the complete media frenzy outside her door, nor the vicious online attacks aimed at both her and Daniel. A part of her wanted to hide, to let it pass, to take the easy way out and issue the statement Nathan and the board expected. But another part of her, the part that had found something real in Daniel and Sophie, wasn't ready to walk away. A knock at the door made her jump. Her assistant, Melissa, peeked in. "Margot, you have a visitor." Well, 2 visitors. Margot frowned. "I told security I wasn't seeing anyone." Melissa hesitated before stepping aside, revealing Daniel and Sophie standing in the hallway. Margot's breath caught. Sophie, holding her drawing tightly, looked up with those big brown eyes and whispered, "Miss Margot, please don't go away." Margot's heart cracked straight down the middle. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she knelt down instead. "Sweetheart, why would you think I'd go away?" Sophie hesitated before holding up her drawing. "Because people are saying mean things about you. But Daddy says when things get hard, family stays together." Margot stared at the picture, at the simple but powerful declaration. Family stays together. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. Daniel cleared his throat. "We're not here to make things harder for you, Margot. But if you're going to walk away, we need to hear it from you, not from the headlines." Margot gripped the edge of the drawing, her fingers trembling. She had spent her life choosing power over vulnerability, security over risk. But staring at the 2 people in front of her, she realized something profound. She didn't want to choose power this time. She wanted to choose them. Slowly she stood and looked Daniel in the eye. "I don't want to walk away." Relief flickered across his face, but he still held back. "Then what do you want?" Margot inhaled deeply, exhaling all the fear, all the control, all the walls she had built around herself. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She let herself believe in something more. "I want to fight." Margot sat in the quiet of her penthouse, staring at the city skyline. The world outside was moving, but inside she was still. Sophie's drawing lay on the table in front of her, the words "family stays together" echoing in her mind. She had spent her life making logical, calculated choices, but this wasn't a business deal. This was something more, something real. Her phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls and texts from her board, PR team, and even Nathan. They all wanted the same thing: damage control. But for the first time in her life, Margot didn't care about damage control. She cared about doing what was right. Across town, Daniel was trying and failing to go about his normal routine. He stacked lumber at the hardware store, his hands moving on autopilot, his mind racing with a storm of thoughts. Margot had said she wanted to fight. But what did that mean? Could she really go against everything she'd built, against the people who controlled her world? And even if she did, was he enough? "Carter, you're zoning out," his co-worker grumbled, tossing a set of nails into a bin. "You keep hammering the same spot. You're going to put a hole in the counter." Daniel blinked down at his hands. Sure enough, he'd been hammering the same nail for nearly 5 minutes. "I gotta go," he muttered, tossing his apron aside. Margot didn't have a plan. Not yet, but she had conviction. That was a start. She walked into her company's headquarters, with her chin held high, past the assistants who whispered behind her, past the executives who watched her like she was walking into battle. Which she was. The boardroom was full, every seat occupied. Nathan sat at the far end, looking like a king surveying his kingdom. The moment she entered, the murmurs died down. Nathan leaned back, smirking. "Margot, finally decided to come to your senses." She placed both hands on the table. "I have." The board members exchanged glances. One of the older men adjusted his glasses. "So you'll issue the statement?" Margot's eyes didn't waver. "No." Silence. Nathan's smirk flickered. "Excuse me?" "I said no." She straightened. "I'm not denouncing Daniel Carter. I'm not walking away from this." The room exploded in protests. "This is reckless. The media frenzy alone. We have investors to think about." Nathan remained silent, watching her with something dangerous in his gaze. Margot waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. "For years I've done what's expected of me. I've played the game, I've followed the rules, and for what? To be told who I can and can't be seen with, who I'm allowed to care about." She let her gaze sweep across the room. "No, more." The older board members sighed. "Margot, we're not saying you can't live your personal life, but the optics—" "I built this company," she cut in. "Not Nathan, not any of you, and I won't let it dictate my life." Nathan finally spoke, his voice smooth. "You're making a mistake." Margot met his gaze. "No, I'm finally making a choice for myself." Nathan leaned forward, resting, his elbows on the table. "You do realize that defying the board like this could cost you everything?" Margot's pulse pounded. She had spent years building Sinclair Enterprises. It was her legacy, but what was the point of power if she was miserable? What was the point of money if she had no one to share it with? She exhaled. "If keeping this company means giving up who I am, then it's not worth having." More silence. This time, heavier. Nathan tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "So, what now? You throw it all away for some single dad and his kid?" Margot's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "You'll find out soon enough. She turned on her heel and walked out, not looking back. Daniel was halfway home when he saw the car pull up. Margot stepped out, heels clicking, against the pavement. There was something different about her, not the polished CEO, not the guarded woman he had first met. This Margot was lighter, freer. Daniel met her halfway, searching her face. "Margot," she smiled softly. "I quit." His brows shot up. "You... what?" She laughed, and it was the first genuine, uninhibited laugh he had heard from her. "I told them I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. And if that meant stepping away, so be it." Daniel ran a hand over his face, trying to process. "Margot, you worked your whole life for that company." "I know," she said simply, "but you and Sophie showed me something more important." His heart pounded. "And what's that?" Margot stepped closer, looking up at him with clear, unwavering eyes. "That power and success mean nothing if I don't have something real to come home to." A beat of silence stretched between them before Daniel finally let out a slow breath, shaking his head with a small smile. "You're crazy," Margot smirked. "A little." Then, before he could say anything else, she reached for him and kissed him. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't hesitant, it was a choice, one she was making without fear, without hesitation. Daniel froze for only a moment before pulling her closer, one hand slipping into her hair, the other settling against the small of her back. When they finally broke apart, Margot smiled against his lips. "So, did that answer your question?" Daniel chuckled, pressing his forehead against hers. Yeah, it did." Lucky barked in the background, and Sophie's voice rang from the porch. "Does this mean Miss Margot is staying forever?" Margot turned, smiling at Sophie. "If that's okay with you," Sophie beamed. "Yes." Daniel exhaled, his heart full. He had spent so long wondering if he was enough, and now, for the first time, he wasn't wondering anymore, because Margot had chosen him, chosen them, and she wasn't looking back. Margot had never felt this light before. The weight of expectations, of boardrooms and corporate battles had been lifted the moment she walked away from Sinclair Enterprises, and yet she knew this was just the beginning. Walking away had been the easy part. Proving that she truly belonged in Daniel and Sophie's life would be harder. The morning after she had left everything behind, Margot found herself in the kitchen of Daniel's small home, standing beside him as he poured coffee into two mismatched mugs. The aroma filled the space, warm and grounding, but there was still an undercurrent of hesitation between them. Daniel finally spoke. "So, what now?" Margot exhaled, staring down at the steaming mug in her hands. "I don't know, and that terrifies me." He studied her, his gaze softer than she expected. "You really left everything behind?" She nodded. "Nathan and the board gave me a choice. Stay in power or choose this." She motioned around the small kitchen, at Lucky curled up by the door, at Sophie's colourful drawings pinned to the fridge. "I chose this." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "And you don't regret it?" Margot didn't hesitate. Not for a second. A small, almost relieved smile played on his lips. "I still don't understand why." Margot reached for his hand, gripping it gently but firmly. "Because for the first time in my life, I want something that isn't measured by profit margins and market shares. I want a life that actually means something." A beat of silence stretched between them before Daniel gently squeezed her hand. "That's a hell of a leap, Sinclair," she smirked. "I'm learning to take risks." But the world wasn't ready to let Margot go so easily. That afternoon, as she stepped onto the porch, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Margot Sinclair," came Nathan's voice, smooth and controlled. "I hope you're enjoying your little vacation." Her grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want, Nathan?" "Just checking in. You know, watching you walk away was quite the show. Investors are panicking. Headlines are brutal. You really Know how to make an exit. Margot gritted her teeth. Goodbye, Nathan. Wait, he said quickly, his tone shifting. You don't have to throw it all away. I can fix this. We can fix this. If you come back now, we can say it was a misunderstanding, that you took a leave of absence, but you're ready to reclaim your rightful place. Margot almost laughed. You really think I want that? Nathan's voice hardened. You think a man like Daniel is ready for the kind of scrutiny that comes with being tied to you? Do you really think his daughter deserves to have reporters digging into her life? Her stomach turned. That was Nathan's greatest weapon, planting seeds. Of doubt, he wasn't outright threatening them. He didn't need to. He was just reminding her what her world could do to people like Daniel and Sophie. Margot took a slow breath. You don't scare me, Nathan. Nathan chuckled. We'll see how long that lasts. The call ended, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. That evening, as Daniel tucked Sophie into bed, Margot sat by the window, staring at the stars. When Daniel joined her, she didn't say anything at first. Then quietly, she said, Nathan called. Daniel tensed. What did he want? She turned to face him, vulnerability etched into her features. To remind me that people like me don't leave his world without consequences. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his face. You're really done with that life. Margot nodded, swallowing hard. I need you to believe that. Daniel studied her for a long moment before nodding. I do. She reached for his hand, but this time Daniel was the one who didn't hesitate to hold on. Margot let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then, slowly, she unclasped the delicate, expensive watch on her wrist. The last real piece of the life she had left behind. She placed it on the windowsill, leaving it behind as she turned fully to Daniel, because for once she had chosen love over power, and she had no intention of turning back. Margot had faced countless high-stakes negotiations in her life, but none of them had ever compared to this, rebuilding a life from scratch with no safety net, no guarantees, just love and the terrifying hope that it would be enough. The next morning, she woke up to the scent of coffee drifting through the small house. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like home in a way she hadn't realized she was missing. Daniel was in the kitchen making breakfast, and for the first time in forever, she wasn't waking up to a boardroom crisis or a media firestorm. She padded over, wrapping her arms around him from behind. You cook now? Daniel smirked. Barely. Margot glanced at the pan, where a half-burnt pancake sizzled questionably. She laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. Points for effort. Daniel turned, his arms sliding around her waist. So, do we have a plan, or are we just winging it? Margot thought about that for a moment. For years, her life had been carefully planned, every step calculated, but now she wanted to embrace the uncertainty. We're winging it, she said. Daniel grinned. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. That afternoon, while Sophie played outside with Lucky, Margot sat at the kitchen table, flipping through job listings. Her phone buzzed, and when she glanced at the screen, her stomach twisted. An email from Sinclair Enterprises. She hesitated. Before clicking it open, Margot, the board is offering you one last chance to reconsider. We can spin this in your favor. Think carefully. This opportunity will not come again. Melissa Grant Margot stared at the words. One last chance. A few weeks ago, she might have considered it. She might have told herself she could have both. Power and love. But now she knew better. Without a second thought, she deleted the email. She had already made her choice. That evening the doorbell rang. Daniel answered it, and Margot's heart clenched when she saw Nathan standing there, looking, too composed, too smug. Nice place, he said, stepping inside, uninvited. Very charming. Daniel tensed beside her, but Margot held up a hand, stepping forward. What do you want? Nathan sighed dramatically. I came to see if you'd finally come to your senses, but judging by the fact that you're still here, I guess not." Margot crossed her arms. "I have no interest in whatever game you're playing." Nathan's expression darkened. "You think you can just walk away? That the world will let you?" He let out a low chuckle. "You have no idea how ruthless people can be." Margot met his gaze, unwavering. "I do, but I also know I don't need your approval anymore," Nathan smirked. "Fine, if you want to throw your life away for—" He flicked his gaze toward Daniel. "This, then so be it." Daniel took a step forward. "You should leave." Nathan held his hands up in mock surrender. "Relax, I'm already gone." He turned to Margot one last time. "Enjoy your new life, Sinclair. Let's see how long it lasts." As the door closed behind him, Margot let out a slow breath. Nathan was finally out of her life. Daniel turned to her. "You okay?" She smiled, and for the first time in a long time she really was. "Yeah, I am." A week later, Margot stood at the park, watching as Sophie chased Lucky through the grass, giggling wildly. Daniel stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "I still don't get it." Margot raised a brow. "Get what?" He smirked. "Why you chose this?" She turned to him, her expression soft but certain. "Because for the first time in my life, I know what real power is. And it's not in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals." Daniel tilted his head. "Then what is it?" Margot laced her fingers through his. "It's this. It's waking up to burnt pancakes and bedtime stories. It's knowing that no matter what happens, I'm not alone." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head with a smile. "You really did fall for us, didn't you?" Margot laughed. "Hopelessly." He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good. Because we're not letting you go." Margot closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment settle over her. She had spent her whole life chasing something she thought she needed, only to realize everything she had ever wanted was right here, and she wasn't looking back. Thank you so much for watching this story. I'm really curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories travel, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Your support means the world. Like, comment, and share if this story resonated with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Once again, thank you for being here. You make this journey so special. See you in the next one.